son and his fiancée gave the performance of their lives at that rehearsal dinner. But I was the one who had already seen behind the curtain, and I had exactly one night to decide what to do about it. Let me back up. My name is not important. What is important is that I am 63 years old. I buried my wife 11 years ago, and my son, my only child, is the thing I have built my entire life around since then. His name is Marcus. No, wait. I need to stop myself right there because that is a name from a different story. My boy's name is Edwin. Edwin Paul Gaines. He has his mother's eyes and my stubbornness, and for 31 years I have watched him grow from a squirming, red-faced infant into a man I am genuinely proud of. Edwin is a structural engineer. He designs bridges. There is something poetic about that, I think, though I have never said it to his face because he would roll his eyes at me and tell me to stop being sentimental. He lives in Charlotte, North Carolina, about 4 hours from where I retired to, just outside of Roanoke, Virginia. After his mother passed, we got closer than most fathers and sons I know. We talk every Sunday. We watch football together when I drive down. He is the reason I kept going in those first years after I lost her. So when Edwin called me 18 months ago to say he had met someone, I felt the way you feel when a season changes. Something in the air shifts, and you know the world is rearranging itself, whether you are ready or not. Her name was Cassandra Webb. He met her at a charity event for the Boys and Girls Club. She was 34, worked in marketing for a pharmaceutical company in Charlotte, drove a used Camry, and told him on their second date that she had gotten out of a bad engagement 3 years prior and was in no rush. Edwin told me all of this on the phone, and something about the way he said it, carefully, like he was measuring every word, told me he had already made up his mind about her before he even asked what I thought. I met Cassandra for the first time at Thanksgiving, 6 months into their relationship. She was striking, tall, put together, the kind of woman who fills a room without trying. She brought a sweet potato pie she claimed to have made from scratch and complimented my late wife's photograph on the mantel and called me Mr. Gaines, even after I told her twice to call me by my first name. Edwin watched her the whole evening with this look I recognized. It was the same look I had given his mother back in 1984 at a cookout in somebody's backyard in Baltimore. Total uncomplicated devotion. I told myself I was being protective because that is what fathers do. I told myself the small things I noticed, the way she glanced at the framed photo of Edwin's firm on the wall, the way she asked twice what his pension plan looked like, just out of curiosity, when nothing, just conversation, just nerves. I told myself that right up until the night before their wedding, Edwin and Cassandra had planned the rehearsal dinner at a restaurant in Charlotte called the Ellington Room, a private event space downtown, the kind of place with exposed brick and Edison bulbs and a pre-fixie menu that costs more per head than my first car payment. The wedding itself was the next evening, at a botanical garden 20 minutes outside the city. Edwin had a good salary. He had also inherited a modest amount from his mother's life insurance, money he had quietly grown in index funds over the past decade. He was, by any reasonable standard, financially stable, not wealthy, comfortable. The kind of comfortable you build slowly and protect carefully. There were about 40 people at the rehearsal dinner. Family, close friends, the wedding party. Cassandra's side was smaller. Her mother had passed years ago, her father lived in Phoenix and flew in for the occasion, and she had 2 younger sisters and a tight circle of girlfriends who laughed loudly and took a great many photographs. I had driven down that afternoon. Edwin had set me up in the hotel across the street from the restaurant, and around 8 o'clock I excused myself from the dinner table. I am 63, and my knee has been giving me trouble since March, and the chair I had been sitting in for 2 hours was not doing me any favors. I told Edwin I was going to use the restroom and stretch my legs a bit, and he nodded and turned back to his conversation. The Ellington Room had a long corridor that connected the main dining space to a private lounge area they used for bridal parties and small gatherings. As I walked down that corridor, moving slowly because of the knee, I heard voices from the lounge. The door was not fully closed. I was not trying to listen. I want to be absolutely clear about that. I am not the kind of man who lurks. But the voice I heard belonged to Cassandra, and the tone of it stopped me cold. It was not the voice she used at dinner. It was not the careful, warm voice she used with Edwin. This voice was lower, faster, stripped of its polish. I don't care, Briar. I'm telling you, by the time we hit the 2-year mark, I'll have documentation on the joint account. He doesn't even check it. He trusts me completely. A pause. Someone on the other end of the phone, Briar apparently, said something. He's sweet. He genuinely is. But sweet doesn't pay off $40,000 in credit card debt, does it? That's what a good settlement does. Another pause. His retirement account alone. Briar, I looked at the statements he left on the counter. That man has done very well for himself. And he just thinks I love him. And I do. I mean, it's not like I hate him. But I would not be standing in a botanical garden tomorrow in a $4,000 dress if I had other options right now. There was a laugh. Soft, practiced. 2 years, max. By then I'll have documentation to push for 50%. His lawyer won't even see it coming. I've done my research. I stood in that corridor for what felt like a very long time. My knee hurt. The sounds from the dining room drifted down the hallway. Silverware, laughter, Edwin's laugh somewhere in the middle of it, easy and open. My son, my boy who designs bridges, my boy with his mother's eyes. I did not go into that lounge. I walked, very carefully, very slowly, back to the dining room. I sat down. I accepted a refill of my water. Edwin looked over at me and grinned and said, "You good, Dad?" And I said, "Better now," because what else was I going to say? I spent the rest of that dinner with a smile on my face that I built brick by brick. When I got back to my hotel room that night, I sat on the edge of the bed and put my hands on my knees and breathed. $40,000 in credit card debt. Joint account documentation. 2 years, max. I kept hearing that laugh. Soft. Practiced. I'm not a man who acts without thinking. I spent 28 years as a high school principal. I have handled parents who lied to my face, teachers who falsified documents, students who manipulated situations they thought I couldn't see. I know what it looks like when someone is running a long con. And I know that the worst thing you can do in that situation is tip your hand before you are ready. I also know that if I walked into my son's hotel room that night and said, "I heard your fiancée on the phone, and I think she is marrying you to take your money and leave in 2 years, he would not have believed me. I know my son. He would have said I was being overprotective. He would have said I had never fully warmed to Cassandra. He would have reminded me, gently but firmly, that he is 31 years old and capable of making his own decisions. And he would have married her anyway, at 10 o'clock the next morning, and I would have watched it happen and known what I knew. So I thought. I had my phone in my hand, and I thought about what I actually had. I had what I heard, my word against hers, a conversation she could claim I misunderstood, taken out of context, that I was a grieving widower who projected his fears onto the woman his son loved. I needed something she couldn't explain away. Then I thought about Briar. Cassandra had used that name clearly, Briar, and she had said things to Briar, specific things, about documentation, about a settlement, about 2 years. If Briar was a close enough friend to receive that phone call the night before the wedding, she was someone Cassandra trusted deeply, which meant there might be a pattern, which meant there might be other people who knew. I am 63 years old, and I will admit that I am not entirely comfortable with social media. But I know enough. I know how to find people. I went through what I remembered of Cassandra's friends from the evening. I had met several of them at the engagement party 4 months ago, and Edwin had mentioned names. It took me 40 minutes of careful searching on my phone, sitting on that hotel bed, before I found a woman named Brianna Locke, Charlotte area. Tagged in several of Cassandra's older posts. In one photo from 2 years ago, the two of them at a rooftop bar, the caption read, "My girl, always in my corner, no matter what." I looked at Brianna Locke's profile for a long time. Then I did something I have thought about many times since, and I will not pretend it did not cost me something. I wrote her a message. I told her who I was. I told her I was Edwin's father. I told her that I'd heard Cassandra's phone call that evening, and that I was not angry, and that I was not going to make a scene at anyone's wedding. I told her that I was a 63-year-old man who had raised his son alone for 11 years, and that I was asking her, human being to human being, to tell me the truth about what she knew. Then I put the phone down, and I did not sleep. At 5:17 in the morning, my phone buzzed. Brianna Locke had written back. The message was long. I will not reproduce all of it here because some of it is not mine to share. But the important parts: she had known Cassandra for 9 years. She said she had been troubled for months. She said Cassandra had done something similar before. Not identical, but similar. A man in Atlanta 3 years ago. An engagement that ended after 14 months after a dispute over a joint checking account. She said she had told herself it was different this time. She said she was sorry. She said she would do whatever she needed to do. I wrote back, "Meet me for breakfast, 6:30, the lobby cafe." She was there when I arrived. A small woman in her mid-30s, natural hair, quiet eyes. She looked like someone who had not slept either. We sat across from each other, and she ordered coffee, and I ordered nothing, and she said, "I should have said something sooner," and I said, "You're saying something now. That's what matters." What Brianna gave me over the next 40 minutes was not just corroboration. She had a text message. Cassandra had sent it to her 3 weeks ago after Edwin had transferred money into their newly opened joint account for wedding expenses. The text read, "It's starting. This time I'm doing it right. 2 years of patience, and I'll never have to worry again. Don't tell me I don't deserve this." Brianna had screenshotted it and never deleted it because, she said, some part of her always knew this moment might come. I took a photograph of her phone screen with my own phone. Then I sat back and I thought about my son sleeping in his hotel room 4 floors up, with no idea that the life he was about to walk into had been architected around his blind spot. I thought about the next 16 hours, and I made a decision. I did not go to Edwin that morning, not yet. The wedding was at 10 o'clock that evening. They had chosen a sunset ceremony, the botanical garden lit with string lights and candles, the ceremony starting at 6:30 and dinner following. I had time. I had the photograph of that text message, and I had Brianna, who agreed to be present when I needed her. What I also had was something Cassandra did not know I had, the knowledge that she believed she had gotten away clean. That is the thing about people who deceive carefully. They become comfortable. They stop watching for the thing they don't expect. I spent that day as a perfectly ordinary father of the groom. I attended the small luncheon at the hotel. I took photographs with Edwin in his suit. I shook hands with Cassandra's father, a quiet man from Phoenix named Robert Webb, who seemed genuinely happy and had no idea about any of this, and I felt a sadness for him that I carried the rest of the day. He loved his daughter. He believed in this marriage. He was the same as me, standing on the same piece of ground, just on the other side of the fence. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, I asked Edwin if we could talk privately, just the two of us, in my room. He sat on the edge of the armchair and looked at me the way he used to when he was 16 and thought he was in trouble for something, and I almost lost my nerve right there. I almost said, "Nothing, son. I just wanted to see you before the big moment." I almost let it go, but I kept hearing that laugh, soft, practiced. I would not be standing in a botanical garden tomorrow in a $4,000 dress if I had other options right now. I told him everything. I told him about the corridor. I told him every word I had heard. I told him about Brianna Locke and I showed him the photograph of the text message on my phone, and I put my phone in his hands, and I let him read it as many times as he needed to. He sat very still for a long time. Then he said, "Dad," and his voice broke on that one word in a way I had not heard since his mother's funeral, and I moved over to that armchair and put my hand on his shoulder, and I said, "I know, son. I know, son. I know." We sat like that for a while. Then he straightened up, and I watched something shift in his face, something quiet and cold and resolute, and I recognized it because I have worn that same expression a few times in my life in moments that required me to be harder than I felt. He said, "She needs to answer for this, not just hear that I know. She needs to answer for it." He called Brianna himself from my room. He thanked her. He asked her one question. Was she willing to say what she knew directly to Cassandra tonight? Brianna said yes. The plan was Edwin's. I want to be clear about that. I gave him the information. The plan was his. At the Botanical Garden, 40 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, while guests were arriving and being seated among the flower beds and the string lights, Edwin asked Cassandra to step into the small anteroom they had reserved for the wedding party. He told her he wanted a private moment before they walked out. She went in, smoothing her dress, smiling. Brianna was already in that room. When Cassandra saw Brianna standing there, something crossed her face that I only saw for a second before she reassembled it. It was the look of someone who has just realized the ground beneath them has shifted. She said, "Bria, what are you doing in here?" Brianna said, quietly, "Tell him the truth, Cassie." Cassandra looked at Edwin. She started to speak. The voice she used with Edwin, warm, confused, reaching for his arm. He stepped back. Just one step, and he said, "I read the text. I know about Atlanta. My dad heard you on the phone last night. This is over." What followed was not a movie scene. She did not confess dramatically. She did not break down. What she did was cycle through anger, then bargaining, then something that might have been shame. Though I cannot be certain of that. She said things I will not repeat, because some of them were cruel and none of them were true. She said Edwin had misunderstood, that Brianna had twisted things, that the text was a joke between friends. She said I had always hated her. Edwin listened to all of it. Then he said, "There are 60 people sitting in those chairs out there. I'm going to go out there and tell them that the wedding has been called off. I'd like you to gather your things and be gone before I'm done speaking." And then he walked out of that anteroom and I followed him, and he stood up in front of those 60 people, his people, her people, his mother's sister from Baltimore, and his college roommate from Greensboro, and Robert Webb from Phoenix, who had flown in to see his daughter get married. And he said, calmly and clearly, that the wedding would not be taking place that evening, and that he was sorry they had come out, and that he would be in touch. There was a silence that I felt in my chest. Then his college roommate stood up and started clapping, slowly, then faster, and a few others joined in, not all of them, not most of them, but enough to let Edwin know he was not standing there alone. Robert Webb left quickly. I don't know what he was told afterward. I hope someone was kind to him. Cassandra was gone by the time Edwin came back inside. Brianna had left too, and she sent Edwin a text later that night that simply said, "I'm sorry I didn't do this sooner. You deserved better." Edwin and I sat in my hotel room that night and ate delivery pizza from a place near the Botanical Garden and watched whatever baseball game was on, and we didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say. At some point, around midnight, he looked over at me and said, "How did you know to listen? How did you know to go looking?" I thought about that for a moment. "I didn't," I said. "I just went to find the bathroom and I heard something I wasn't supposed to hear. The rest of it, that was you." He shook his head. "No, you could have come back and said nothing. You could have told yourself it wasn't your business." "You're always my business," I said. "That's what this is." He was quiet for another minute. Then he said, "I really thought she loved me." "I know you did." Was I stupid? No, I said. You were trusting. There's a difference. She worked very hard to earn that trust. That's on her, not you. He fell asleep on the other bed some time after 1 in the morning, still in his dress shirt, and I sat in the dark and listened to him breathe and thought about the woman I married 40 years ago, the one who told me on our third date that she was going to love me for the rest of her life and meant every word of it, and I thought about how rare that is, how much it costs to find it, how worth it that cost is if you find the real thing. Edwin started therapy 2 months later. He is doing well. He is careful now in ways he was not before, which makes me sad and proud at the same time, the way parenthood so often does. He called me last Sunday, same as always. He told me he had been asked to lead a new bridge project in Asheville. He sounded like himself, focused, a little bit excited, the way he gets when a problem has enough complexity to be interesting. Before we hung up, he said, I've been thinking about what you said, about trust. Which part? I asked. That there's a difference between trusting and being stupid. I believe that. Yeah, he said, I'm starting to. There's a photograph on my mantel now. It used to be just his mother's picture and the school portrait of Edwin from 3rd grade with the missing tooth and a few small things. But a few weeks ago, Edwin mailed me a photo from the luncheon that day. The two of us standing together in the hotel lobby, both in our suits, before everything happened. Before he knew, he's smiling his easy smile, and I've got my hand on his shoulder, and neither of us knows what the next 6 hours will bring. I look at that photograph sometimes when I'm sitting in the quiet of this house. I kept my promise to him, the one I made to myself the moment I heard that voice in the corridor. The promise that whatever it cost me, whatever it required, I would not let him walk into something that would break him. Not on my watch, not while I'm still standing. That's what fathers are for. I still think about that corridor sometimes, the way the sounds from the dining room drifted down. Silverware, laughter, my son's voice, somewhere in the middle of it all, easy and open, while I stood there in the quiet and heard something that rearranged everything I thought I knew about the next day. People talk about karma like it's a cosmic scorekeeper, some invisible force that balances the ledger in the end. I don't know if I believe in that exactly. What I do believe is this. The choices we make build the life we end up living, brick by brick, whether we're paying attention or not. Cassandra made choices. She made them carefully over a long period of time, with deliberate calculation, and those choices, not bad luck, not fate, not some outside force, are what brought her to that anteroom at the botanical garden, facing the man she had deceived, watching everything she had constructed come apart. That is the thing about deception that most people don't account for. It requires you to become someone who deceives, and the longer you do it, the more of yourself you trade away for it. By the time I heard her on that phone, she had been doing this long enough that her voice didn't even waver. That laugh, soft, practiced, was no longer a performance. It had become the thing itself. That is not a small loss. Edwin lost something too, and I won't pretend otherwise. He lost the version of the future he had imagined. He lost the ease of trusting without thinking twice. That cost is real, and it is his to carry. But what I watched him build in the months after, quietly, without drama, with a steadiness that reminded me so much of his mother, told me something about who my son actually is. He did not let what happened to him become the story of who he is. He grieved it, and then he went back to work, designing bridges, solving problems that require patience and precision, and the willingness to hold weight. That is the thing I keep coming back to when I think about what all of us went through that night. It was not just about catching someone in a lie. It was about what each person chose to do with what they knew. Brianna Locke knew, and she carried it alone for months until she couldn't anymore. And then she chose honesty over loyalty to someone who had never actually been honest with her. Edwin knew, and he chose not to collapse, not to explode, but to act with a clarity and a dignity I have never been more proud of. And I knew, and I chose to not look away, even when looking away would have been so much easier. There is a version of that night where I go back to my seat, finish my water, smile through the rest of the dinner, and tell myself it is not my place. That version ends with my son 2 years into a marriage designed to hollow him out. I could not live in that version, not because I'm fearless. I was terrified the entire time, but because some things matter more than your own comfort. I have told Edwin that what he has underneath all of it is something that cannot be manufactured, a sense of right, a mind that keeps working when everything is falling apart, and the backbone to stand up in front of 60 people and say the true thing, out loud, when silence would have been far easier. Those 3 things, knowing what's right, thinking clearly, and holding your ground, will take you further than any amount of luck or inherited advantage. I have watched that proven in my own life, over and over, in ways both small and large. I don't know what Cassandra's life looks like now. That is not mine to know. I hope, genuinely, that she finds her way to something real, because living inside a lie is its own kind of prison, and no one gets out of that without paying a price. What I do know is that my son called me last Sunday, same as always. He told me about the bridge project in Asheville. He sounded like himself. That is enough. That is everything.